Welcome to Squeamish. We're going to be discussing an assortment of things around the intersection between biology and science fiction.
With slides.
Sorry?
With slides.
With slides?
No, we don't have.
No
No
slides.
slides.
Oh.
We are a pre-watershed panel.
It's just a panel, yeah.
Though I would like to note, despite us being a pre-watershed panel, if there are small children in the room, we're going to provide you with nightmares. And that's cool, but that should be a choice your parents make, not a choice we make for you.
I'm going to ask the panel to introduce themselves. Start with Sean and I'll get one of my guests on.
Hello, I'm Seanan. I'm also Mira Grant. I had a tapeworm for 2 years. His name was Timmy. When I killed him with antiparasitics, I pooped toothpaste for 3 days.
This is already your best panel ever.
Yes. I'm Joan Paterson. I'm a doctor and I work in the NHS. I'm a consultant and my particular specialty is clinical genetics. I have been a paediatrician as well in the past. So I've seen some pretty gross stuff in real life. But as a geneticist, obviously I have to think a lot about the future and how some of the treatments we're going to come up with may cause problems.
I'm Tim Kirk, I'm the moderator, but I have in the past worked in a hospital pathology lab.
I'm Arden, I'm a computational biologist, and I work some with cancer research as well as genomics and synthetic biology, creating synthetic organisms and things like that. And I'm also contracted to write a science fiction novel from Spring.
I'm Dr. Bob, also known as Amanda. I currently work in television for the BBC Paterson unit, but one of my past careers I used to watch dead animals rot for a living.
Sean, do you want to start us off with things?
I want to listen to the doctors talk about dead stuff. I don't have a medical background. My whole background is bothering people with medical backgrounds. This is the best panel. Amuse me.
I don't think I'll start off with gross stuff particularly. We can build up to that. Obviously, one of the challenging parts of my job is where ethics comes into a lot of the questions and decisions that people have to make. And so I think that, educating people about genetics isn't just about the science, it's about making them think about some of the ethical issues that those decisions are going to sort of have. And one of the interesting debates that I've been having with some of my colleagues recently has been about a pilot that's happening. One of my ex-trainees is actually the sort of UK coordinator for. So her particular specialty, apart from genetics, is skeletal dysplasias. So genetic disorders means your skeleton doesn't grow properly. And so she is actually coordinating the treatment pilot for achondroplasia. So for those that don't know, achondroplasia is the most common form of dwarfism. And it looks really promising. I think that if they want to redo, a reboot of Game of Thrones in a couple of generations, they're not going to have anybody to play the part who's got achondroplasia because there won't be anybody. Unless people with achondroplasia decide they don't want to be treated. That leads to sort of a whole load of questions. I think most parents of normal height who have a child with achondroplasia will choose to have their child treated so that they're not short. And one of the sort of debates I'm having with colleagues is, will parents who've got achondroplasia themselves, who have a 50% risk of having a child with achondroplasia, will they actually choose to have achondroplastic children who are short? Because there's a very analogous to the whole issue about the deaf community and about whether deaf parents decide to have deaf children. And I think, I haven't got the answers to that. That will be up to people themselves to decide. But I think as more things like that become treatable, it opens up a whole load of other issues. I don't know whether anybody else has thoughts on that. Nick?
So you're working on
Well,
synthetic organisms, was that
Yeah, so
quality there?
yeah, so I think there could be some. I know that people say you're creating life in the lab at times. We're putting things together, and sometimes you're just putting together chemicals. They're not quite there yet, but they're quite close to being able to take lipid membranes, which are clearly not alive, and then nucleic acids, which are also clearly not alive, and putting them together and making a cell. And what is our responsibility if we've created something like that?
Sean, you have written some books about what happens when that goes wrong.
You gave me a whole panel of doctors. Now you want me to talk. It's like being a weird kind of Jeopardy.
I'm not a medical doctor,
Well,
so
that helps a bit. But no, it's not I feel intimidated. It's I love listening to doctors talk. They're great, especially when you get a drug. So we get some beers for the doctors. Not actually, I wouldn't do that to you. It becomes this whole question of the complexity of life, what responsibility we have, but where is it? I mean, are we creating life when we force flatworms that would not have otherwise bred in the lab to breed? Yes, we're starting with a thing that's already alive, but we're still manipulating it. We've taken rats and we've pushed them to an extent where we have entire breeds of rat. They're not species, they're breeds. We have breeds of rat that have a lifespan of less than 4 months when the average for the domestic rat is 5 years. We have breeds of rat that get cancer if you look at them funny because we have bred them to have unstable cell membranes. You know, we've messed these creatures up. If we're going to start talking about do we have a responsibility to the single cell that we have suddenly found a way to create, shouldn't we be looking at do we have a responsibility at these creatures that we have twisted far out of what any evolutionary branch would have done to them so that we can use them in lab work? I mean, I agree it's an ethical question, but I think it's an ethical question we should have started asking ourselves 20 years ago. But we have this tendency to wait until we can freak out because it looks like we're going to play Frankenstein, you know?
I think they have looked at that. I mean, I think I'm not a medical ethicist, so I can't really speak that much about it. You might even know more as a physician than I do, but I know that people do think about the laboratory animals. I think one of the things is because that's been going on so long, most people aren't aware of that because it's kind of been handled. I remember when they first started doing what they call gene cloning, which is it's just simply taking bits of DNA, putting it in a bacteria, and growing up more bits of DNA. And this created a whole bunch of, when it got out into the community that, we are mixing up different animals, this is really scary and dangerous. And that was, I think, in the 1970s? Does anyone know? And now that's basically standard laboratory practice that nobody blinks at. And because it doesn't really have that much impact, I have a bacteria that can make other things, and some of them are now making human insulin, which is helpful.
I went to UC Berkeley, which is like the king of the crunchy granola liberal schools. So we had a huge animal rights movement on campus. And they never talked about the modified laboratory animals that we've got, the breeds that we've created. Because a naked, quivering, half-sized rat with a human ear growing out of its back is nowhere near as sympathetic to most people as Remy from Ratatouille. So they always focus on the photogenic, attractive animals, and they kind of leave the things that we really should be asking the ethical questions about.
and you can also get away with it by doing your experiments in the geology department rather than the biology department, and they never figure out the protest outside geology because it's just rocks in there.
So what was in the geology?
This was a rotting dead adult. We were Jurassic Park, where they take a fossil and they bring it back to life. We took live things and we made them into fossils. It was mostly squishy marine things, worms, squid, starfish, jellyfish, and so on. killing them, putting them in jars of seawater with different bacteria and with or without mud and so on, and seeing if they would turn into a fossil. It was a 3-year project. Unfortunately, we didn't have to wait several million years to get to actually get fossilised tissue. But the downside, well, not for us, you've got lots of jars of rotting dead sea creatures. After a while, you get used to the smell. So you've got a horrible semi-dissolved worm in a jar like this. To start with, you open the lid and you go, eh! And after a while, you can't smell it unless it's right up against your nose. But the people down the corridor that are working on volcanoes, they can smell it when you're in the jar.
Or when you go home to your husband, he says,
Yeah.
"Ooh, what's it been today?"
It's amazing how thin the line between scientists and serial killers.
Okay, I think that sort of SF has come quite a long way in terms of using science to make stories. I think a lot of writers now actually put some serious research into looking at things, which makes me happier than sort of reading stories that people used to write, where sort of genetics is the Lego approach to it. You know, I get a gene for a leg, so if I put this many genes, somebody will grow 20 legs instead of 2. Doesn't work that way. So a lot of writers are much better at actually using science and sort of trying to think about, well, if you take this idea and kind of take it to extreme, this is where we get to. But even some of the science I deal with on a day-to-day basis completely boggles me.
It's interesting, the things that we are culturally conditioned to accept as real science that aren't, versus the things that we will just reject as can't be possible that are. I wrote a book, very thoroughly researched, spent a lot of time talking to the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control. It's a very large health organization in America. I think the equivalent here would be the National Health Service, sort of. Do you guys have an epidemiological investigatory arm? Public health, the World Health Organization?
Probably London School of Tropical Medicine will probably be lumbered for the job of the.
It's a bunch of doctors who really like it when authors call them and are like, so let's raise the dead. And so I wrote this book, and it has in it force-grown human cloning to adult size in under 6 months and bioelectric memory transfer. No one has called me on the cloning being bad science. Even though it is, it's terrible science. It's fantasy, it's hand-wavium, it's the one impossible thing you get per book. You cannot force-grow a human clone in 6 months. But we're already doing bioelectric memory transfer. We've moved on to doing it with orangutans, I believe. One of the study groups is now actually transferring memories from one orangutan to another orangutan by photographing the electric activity in the brain. So that's a thing we're doing right now with higher primates. We are moving toward eternal sunshine of the spotless mind being a potentially possible thing. I don't think it'll be that razor sharp and fictionally perfect, but we're still getting there. It's being touted as a possible Alzheimer's treatment. Because if they could take a clean snapshot of your brain and find a way to get the gunk off, they could possibly put your memories back. Everyone calls me on that. Everyone says that's fake science, that's bad science, that's not real science. Because science so often looks like science fiction, but it's really on the fringe of what is possible.
I think they did they'd inserted memories into rats. That they would take the trace from another rat that was running a maze and then activate those areas of another rat's brain, and then the new rat can run the maze without actually ever having run it, so it's gotten the memory from the other rat.
Yeah, until we start doing it on humans, which we'll work our way up to eventually, we won't know whether it's just knowledge that's going over or whether they're getting a full memory. I mean, it depends on how perfect that electric overlay is, so I'm assuming there'll be some degradation. But it's a thing a lot of people are working on very hard right now, so extrapolating it to memory transfer in 20 years is completely reasonable.
Because one of the things, because I know the rat stuff, they know a lot about rats and how they know where they are in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And there's these things called place cells, and they've got a particular neuron that will fire for a particular place in the world and nowhere else in the world. And eventually, if you take them somewhere else and you keep them somewhere else for a couple months, then that neuron will retrain. But they have these neurons that are specific for different places. And we might be able to do things like implant maps of, because humans also have this type of this same brain area, but we don't know as much about it because we can't implant quite so many electrodes. But you might be able to do something like, get the map of the new town you are and plug it in, and be able to know where you're going. Just kind of.
And yet, this is better science than forest-growing human clones, and yet property after property presents us with those clones to the point that they become background works. They become, of course that works, that's how science fiction works. But this thing that is real science, a whole lot of things that are real science, are impossible, and we're going to reject them.
Also,
Nobody questions the science of your faster than light drive, but boy will they grill you on how your doorknobs work.
You need a faster than light drive for so many books to make it work.
Right.
So people let it slide.
You need doorknobs as well, otherwise it's really darn scary.
I also think people don't like to think, though, about what science could really do. One of my favorite statements when I'm really tired and grumpy is I could wipe out the human race for $3,000 in a sample of smallpox. This is a completely...
I was immune, I was vaccinated.
So these Australians, these dumb Australians, decided, they were Australian exterminators, they did this in 2007, they decided that they wanted to make mousepox more efficacious as a means of killing mice in houses. Mousepox is a very close relative of smallpox. They're practically identical. And exterminators pretty regularly will pump mousepox into the walls of a home that has a bad infestation to kill the mice that are in there.
What could possibly go wrong?
Now, in a normal mouse population that has not previously been exposed to mousepox, you'll have about 80% susceptibility and 20% will survive. The trouble is that 20% is resistant. They start passing resistance on. So mousepox works less and less well as time goes by. These Australians were like, we don't want to stop using mousepox because it works so good. So let's find a way to make it work better. They ordered a specific immunosuppressant gene that you can still get out of any genetics catalog. They spliced it into their mousepox using a technique that you learn in your first year of genetics. And they created, what they were hoping for was to get it back up to an 80% kill rate in a resistant population, and maybe hit 90 to 100 in a non-resistant population. They got a slate wiper. It has been 100% efficacious on every colony it's been tested on, because at this point, the immunosuppressant gene that is in the virus lets the virus just walk right in. It says, hi, it's
Do
cousin
they not
Bob.
have risk assessments in Australia?
No, they live in Australia. But here's my favorite part of this, right? They did it. I know they did it because I read the paper they published explaining step by step exactly how to do it. Humans have the same receptor gene. You can order it from the same catalog. It costs $37.95 plus shipping. $3,000 and a sample of smallpox, and I could just wipe out humanity.
There's an undergraduate competition called iGEM, which is International Genetic Engineering Machines. And there's places that you can order this DNA from, and they'll have checks. So you can't kind of order really pathogenic, the bad bit of some virus. But you can order other pieces. And I think a Chinese, and they say things like, well, we'll make sure we're sending them to one place, to good places. But a Chinese team of undergraduate students had a whole bunch of things sent to their homes. And they kind of did this report showing that about 90% of the stuff they were able to get sent to their homes from all around the world to China.
We had to order, for making biological fixatives, to fix the tissue so you can put it in the electron microscope. And there was one of the chemicals we needed for this particular recipe. I can't remember, it's a grade 1 or grade 3, the most lethal one. It was a known poison, get this on you and you'll die. A known carcinogen, a suspected mutagen and suspected teratogenic. It's horrible stuff. So we're ordering it from a chemical company, and they won't deliver it to the geology department because they don't have secure chemical store. They will only deliver it to the chemistry department in the university. So they do, and then we walk across the road, and we pick up the box from the chemistry department, and we walk back across the road, and we put it in our, chemical store. So they'll send this stuff, but then we can do whatever we like with it. Sort of going, if someone had been hit by a bus that was coming down the hill at just that moment, we could have, wiped out half the university.
I'm not normally a conspiracy theorist. I find that the world is much more interesting than conspiracies. But I thought it was really fascinating how a bunch of researchers finally sequenced the Spanish flu, finally got it right, figured out why the Spanish flu did what it did, and then we had an outbreak less than 6 months later. It was like, somebody dropped a vial here. Like, whether it was on purpose or accidental, it's too tight to be coincidental. And that was fun. We had swine flu all up and down California. We enjoyed it so much. It was great. Flu vaccines are great.
Sorry, I'm on the brain freeze here.
Skeleton reboots.
Yeah, sorry. Something.
Right, well,
Do we have a roving mic? Yeah.
well, the question has to be asked.
There's a lot of people, I think, who would be able to get or who have easily got the knowledge to wipe out either the human race or a whole lot of it. Even I, from electrical engineering, could probably do a tremendous lot of harm if I focused my mind on it. So you have to ask yourself why it's not happened yet. It can only be because the people who can figure out how to do it for some reason or another don't want to.
Or wipe himself out and the next stage in the chain doesn't happen. If you're in your mountain stronghold or under your hollowed out volcano and you do drop that vial, it's not going
I'm
any
sure
harm.
Seanan could figure out how to make herself immune
If I
and
made,
nobody else.
if I made a site wiper one, I couldn't make myself immune. I'm still I'm just one alien plant person trying to navigate a strange mammalian world. But apart from that, I really like Disney World. And I can't operate Disney World by myself. The robots are not that advanced. I think that's, with the biological agents at least, that is the big barrier. Viruses do not care about your ideology or your political divide or any of those things. Viruses care about killing people. And the United States has done a lot of virological research, has done a lot of biological research into horrible things that we could drop on other people because we're jerks. Although England has also done a lot of that, so y'all are jerks too. Everyone's a jerk. And what we have found time and again is as soon as it becomes efficacious, as soon as we can really use it to mess some people up, it messes us up too, and we don't want to do that. The person that lets loose smallpox and kills the human race is going to be someone who has decided the human race needs to go, not somebody who decides that the other side needs to go. And I think that people who are that nihilistic are rarer, thankfully. Most of us have something we want to have continue on in this world. What I worry about is a Frank Herbert, the White Plague scenario. Frank Herbert wrote one of the first really bad biological, virological attack books. It was actually a lovely book. It was about a scientist who was in Ireland during the Troubles, and his wife and daughter got killed by a car bomb. And so he decided he was going to make a disease that would kill all the women because the Irish didn't deserve to have women anymore. And he did not anticipate this disease spreading and killing all the women in the world. He thought it would stay in Ireland. He was not thinking very clearly. So when I'm worried about someone who has just lost the thing that made them go, nah, better not, and has decided to do it.
So if Disney World gets destroyed, we should worry.
Oh yeah. Disney World closes, y'all should be concerned. I would like to take a moment and remind our NSA monitors who are listening on some sort of remote feed that we are science fiction authors, fans, and professionals, and are not actually planning to kill mankind yet.
special volunteer exercise
Okay.
program, isn't it?
I'd like to get back to what you said earlier about it apparently being so much easier to believe some things are possible that are totally impossible, and to regard things that we are just on the verge of mastering as science fiction. I find it a little bit disturbing at the moment, looking at what's happening in the working towards Mars One and other exploratory activities from the medical point of view, because we are looking at a lot of research. For example, European Space Agency looking at the psychological impact of working in this restricted, isolated environment, how the teams need to be and how the teams develop. But the harder science bits, they are, so I'm sure they're working on them, but there are so many questions unanswered, and we're just literally going ahead and ignoring what we can't answer. Like, does the human immune system function for any length of time outside blood and blood? What happens to our calcium metabolism? And countless more. So I think we're being very positivistic, and in many ways we ignore the actual problems in an effort to say, yeah, we can do this, we are going ahead, no matter what.
I think what do you think of trying to figure out how to deal with scurvy before we launched our first big ocean voyage? If we sat around and waited to be sure of everything that a trip would do to humans.
I found it interesting that the company that's proposing to do a Mars trip and ask for volunteers was declaring it a one-way trip. So the volunteers would have to be prepared to die at the end of it. So they're being rather more realistic about the fact there might be some health hazards involved.
I actually think the most unrealistic thing, given the quarters involved and the size of it, is that they keep not just going, and we're taking an all-female crew. Because every psych study that's been performed by every Navy in the world has shown that women perform better long-term on submarines than men do. We're socialized to do better in close quarters and not to stab each other in the neck with pencils quite as often. And it's not an innate thing. I don't think there are any gender essential things like that are universal, but it's how girls tend to be raised and socialized. They perform better as submariners. Well, a mission to Mars that's going to take 14 months flying through the sky in a little tin can is basically a submarine trip surrounded by an absolute absence of anything. So we keep trying to find a way to make it safe for men psychologically, and I don't think we're going to be able to do that.
Women tend to be smaller, so you have less weight to carry. Speak for yourself.
Run!
I think what worries me about the Mars thing is that it's very easy to see it as people saying, "Ooh, Big Brother, done properly, they can't escape." So we're sending these people off in a can to watch them, and they can't get out. And it's going to be television. And it's not science, it's not colonisation, it's watching people kill each other.
That might be what's necessary to get people interested in that. And honestly, as Jacques Cousteau's foundation said, we're looking for 20 volunteers to go down to the bottom of the abyssopelagic zone and stay there for 2 years, and we're going to film the whole thing. I would be the first on the sign-up sheet. Like, I'm going to go see a mermaid. And then it's going to eat that girl I don't like when I shove her out the airlock. It would be great. I would be the only one left alive on the station at the end of 2 years. It would be a horror movie for most of that time, very high ratings, and deep sea exploration would get much more funding.
So getting back to your original question about things, I think we do worry sometimes about the bigger stuff, about like what weightlessness does to our bones and things. We actually know quite a lot about that now after people have spent sort of lengthy periods up on the International Space Station. And the answer is not very nice. But I think some of the more subtle effects of manipulating how your environment affects your body is something we're not really we're only scratching the surface. So, obviously for all sorts of reasons I don't need to go into, I'm sure you can work out, they heavily manipulate the diet that you have when you're in space because of limitations of what they have available. And that will go, even more so on the very long flights to, say, Mars, because they wouldn't have fresh supplies being brought up. And that does things to your insides, to your gut. And I think we're only just starting to realise how much of our moods and who we think of as us, our brains, how our brains function, when you manipulate your gut contents. The bacteria in our gut really do affect us a whole lot more than we ever believed. And I know that one of your books deals with some related issues.
It's not about binomes, it's about parasites. But did you know there are 6 perfect poopers in the United States of America? There are 6 people who are vegan, have never been on antibiotics, have never had a major gastrointestinal infection. Like, there's a whole list of things they've never done. And as a consequence, their internal flora, their binomes, are considered to be pristine, despite being in adults. They are pristine adult binomes. So these 6 people make their living right now pooping for science. Every bowel movement they have is collected and taken for science purposes. They have not pooped in anything but a plastic bag or a cup in the last 5 years. Can you imagine putting that on your resume? What do? I poop for science.
And it's
Party pooper.
Yes, that's where they're getting the fecal transplant material. Not 100% of it. There's a lot that comes from parents or close siblings. There have been a couple cases of folks that had really good gut flora who had some of their poop frozen and preserved before they had to go on antibiotics or have a major surgery so that they could have their own original pristine mint-in-box biome stuck back in there. But most of the fecal transplants that are not provided by family members or personal donations are coming from the 6 perfect poopers.
How do we define them as perfect, given that mankind has been eating meat for, millions of years? There must be microbes that go, yummy, they've eaten
Antibiotics in meat and milk, and at this part of what you need to have a perfect so-called binome is not to have encountered antibiotics.
Okay, so it's not the fact that they're not eating meat; it's they're not eating cows that are on antibiotics.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I mean,
so
if you were
antibiotics are knocking out something that helps you digest.
there's a movement right now in some of the poop scientists, the fecisologists, if you will, to try to convince our Amish communities to allow them to come in and take samples for testing, because we think there might be a sea of perfect poopers out there, but we can't get them to go in the jar. They're like, no, science is blah, because they've been eating meat, and we'd love to have some perfect poopers who do have meat-related binomes. They've been eating meat that has no antibiotics in it at all.
Surely there must be whole rafts of people in rural India or something.
Well, these are the North American perfect poopers.
Okay.
I don't
it's
know.
an international movement.
Yeah, we need to talk about our movement.
At the lab I work at, one of the more senior professors has spent a long time researching glucose and sugar metabolism and stuff like that, and over the last 5 years he's been increasingly working on gut flora and fauna and exactly what's going on in there. And so I first heard about fecal transplants about 5 years ago and thought that'll never catch on. But it is increasingly being useful for a number of things, and will very likely in the next decade become a quite common thing.
For those of you who are interested in some of the potential benefits of this, there have been some experiments looking, for instance, at people who've had fecal transplants who suddenly find major changes to how they cope with diets in terms of weight.
Mm-hmm.
So there's good evidence that some types of bacterial flora mixes actually make people put on weight more easily, and others that help them to lose weight more easily. And you can really see the commercial possibility of that one.
3 members of that research group have lost a lot of weight over the last few years.
Yeah, it really does.
Whether they are, there's been some experimentation, or even it's just changing. It could have been an antibiotic cocktail and change of diet to kill some of the fauna.
So there's evidence that, for instance, certain types of bacterial mixes send out chemical signals that you absorb and that get to your brain that tell you to eat more, to feed your gut bacteria.
I'm looking forward to the ad campaign so much. it's coming, and it's going to come first in America, because America is obsessed with weight loss. We're obsessed with thinness. You have no value if you don't lose weight. And it is going to be the hot new diet drug, but they're going to have to say that it's fecal bacteria. And I'm just so excited to see that first commercial.
Eat shit and diet.
Sir, what's the grossest thing you've ever seen?
Gateway Gate.
I opened the fridge door at work one day when I was in the path lab to find a chunk of arm sitting there, which is made even worse by the fact that it was the lab food fridge.
Somebody wasn't obeying health and safety.
No.
I have to admit, I have freaked my husband out when I was going to be taking some samples with me down from Glasgow to Cambridge, and so I had to collect them the day before we went, which meant that I had bits of baby brain in my fridge at home.
Well, I was, I'm not sure it's the grossest thing, but the honest thing was that there was a brain on my desk, and no one could clean it. And I had to go around saying, whose brain is this? It sat on my desk in this little jar. It was a small brain. It could have been a monkey, maybe a dog, not as small enough as a cat. And it took a while before somebody finally cleaned the brain out of my desk.
Do you want smelly gross or kind of visual declaration? Both, okay. Smelly gross, I mentioned that I used to rot dead animals for a living. You do your experiment, you've got your rotting horrible thing in the jar, you do your results and all the rest of it, you chuck it away and you clean the glassware. This works fine, it's a worm or a starfish or a bit of fish or whatever. If it's squid, you have the smelly jar, you put it in the industrial acid washing dishwasher, and when it's gone through the cycle and it comes out, it still smells of rotting squid, and so does everything else that you wash. And everyone else in the lab hates you. But for some reason, there is some chemical in rotting squid that can bond with glass and everything else. So I had my own glassware. I was not even allowed to share buckets for rinsing out with it for anyone else. So that's the kind of that is the smelliest stuff I've ever encountered. That's one smell you don't get used to. See, and so you take the smell of rotting squid. I did once get given albatross vomit samples. So that's squid that has been rotting inside an albatross, which the supervisor had obtained by frightening an albatross chick and holding a bucket so it would projectile vomit. And then it was my job to open up this squid and open the gut of this squid to find out what the squid had been eaten before the squid had been eaten by the albatross. That's kind of another level of smelliness.
What have you done to annoy him?
A paper he once wrote was he was very careful to say he had sampled 87 albatrosses when he meant killed, in case he's some sort of ancient mariner descended upon him. The most kind of gut-wrenching one is, I work for the, as I said, the BBC Natural History Unit. We have a lot of footage they will never show on television. And I managed to scar one of the other researchers for life. We share a viewing room where you can go and view Russia's tapes and things. And one of the researchers who works on lovely programmes like Flog It and Bargain Hunt and the Antiques Roadshow came in when I was spooling through Russia's tapes of chimpanzees that have been hunting colobus monkeys. And I caught one, hauled it down to the ground, and 3 chimpanzees were eating it alive. There's no sound on this footage, thank goodness. And poor James walked in just at the moment the chimpanzee reached inside this colobus monkey and pulled its whole liver out while it was still alive. And it's just going, why did we keep this? Who's ever going to use it? It's just
So a friend of mine who is not normally a naked friend calls me one day and says, "We're naked friends now." And I'm like, well, that's not normally a decision you get to make for me, as it turns out. And he says, well, no, but I've got something you really want to see. And I'm like, I'm still not sure if it's a decision you get to make for me. So there are many different kinds of gangrene. And there's a kind of gangrene called Fournier's gangrene, which is, some of you know what that is. It only happens to the genitals. It's amazing. It ate some stuff. He wasn't so happy about that. But as soon as the doctors were like, oh God, you have Fournier's gangrene, and explained what was going on and what he hadn't been able to see going on and how much of his scrotum he was going to lose, his first thought, like his actual first thought was, I've got to call Seanan. She's really going to want to see this. And so I got to see Fournier's gangrene, and the doctors are like, is this your girlfriend? No, naked friend. No, she's never seen that before. She thinks this is what it looks like all the time. She's probably much more interested in it. It's black and oozing. Like, would you check it out? Fournier's gangrene, yay, it smelled great. Well, it did not smell great. It smelled like gangrene. Gangrene has a very distinctive smell and a very distinctive taste. Don't ever taste gangrene. I did not taste gangrene. I tasted my own gangrene on an earlier... You win.
My story doesn't really rate next to that at all. I was going to say that probably the smelliest thing on a human I've ever had to cope with was a patient in ITU had massive necrotizing fasciitis, which in case you're a reader of the tabloids is the flesh-eating bug that they so like. It was a very unfortunate patient who had attempted suicide and hadn't succeeded, but had managed to actually damage so much of his tissues that he was in ITU and he got necrotizing fasciitis. So unfortunately this was involved not just limbs, which they would have amputated if that had been a solution, but it was his abdominal wall. So over the course of 2 or 3 weeks, they had to remove more and more of his abdominal wall and basically just pack it with gauze and things to keep it moist and stop his sort of inside from coming out and things. I'm not quite sure what they planned to do in the end if he'd actually survived this, but he did actually die. But in the sort of course of having to look after him for those few weeks, most of us really wanted to make sure we didn't have any sense of smell at all. It was very horrible, and it's probably fortunate he was unconscious all of that time. But yes, some of the things that can happen to the human body are truly disgusting. As doctors, I think it's an unspoken thing about how you deal with bodies and stuff. But one of the very first things you get to do in medical school is cut up bodies for anatomy lessons, and actually, thinking about it in hindsight, I think it's less about teaching you anatomy than teaching you to deal with things that normal people would find truly disgusting and horrible. So once they kind of immunise you against that, it's easy to deal with things afterwards.
So, I've heard a Home Office coroner who has to if archaeologists unexpectedly find a skeleton when they're excavating, they have to get the coroner to come and look at it and go, yeah, it's not a recent death, that's not a murder, get on with it, it's, and he said that, I work with a lot of archaeologists, you can divide the human race into 2 groups, not young or old or male and female or whatever. They're the people that if you come across human remains, there's the ones that go and run away, And round archaeological excavations, they're a bloody nuisance because they'll swoon and faint and, you know, kind of write sternly worded letters to the Times if they see a bone or whatever. And, you know, he said they'd have big strapping, you know, kind of bulldozer drivers who kind of like fainted when a coffin opened when they were moving a cemetery. And then there's the other half of the human race, when they see human race go, ooh, such. And they're a bloody nuisance because they will steal the skulls.
You know, I wanted to make a comment on one of the panels earlier in the weekend when people were talking about skulls. I think Jim Butcher was on and he was talking about, obviously, certain skulls and certain books. As a medical student, you get, when I was, I don't think it happens quite the same way now, but at the time I was a medical student, you get issued a skeleton that you have to keep for 2 years while you're doing anatomy courses. And so you get this kind of wooden box with a disarticulated skeleton in it. And I wasn't quite sure where to keep it, because, you know, when you have visitors to your room or whatever, it's a bit of a conversation stopper. Either that or you discover people want to look at it, and that's slightly weirder. So I kept it under my bed. And a few people I've sort of said this to think this is spooky, but again, you learn to accept this. You know, it's a perfectly normal part of your life. You've got a skeleton under your bed.
Yeah, I shared a date when I was a student with a friend of mine who was trained to be a medical student, and she bought one of these skeletons. And the previous owner had covered it in little labels for their final exam. So the pair of us are cleaning the skeleton, pulling off bits of plasticine and little sticky notes and all those of us. And the landlady walks in. Quite an interesting colour. And went, "It is ready," and went out.
I think most medical schools don't actually issue real skeletons anymore. I think you get fake plastic ones, which is it's a pity because they're never quite the same as real bones. But again, it's this sort of ethics thing came into it, in that actually most of the skeletons that were supplied for use in medical schools were actually from India and they were mostly female skeletons. They were obviously from poor sections of the community who had no say in where their remains went to. And so I think that legally and ethically this is now no longer actually acceptable.
Because I can tell you, there's a film props company in London, it used to be called Film Medical, that has a warehouse filled with, you know, kind of hospital beds of different ages and so on. And they've got huge collections of skeletons, real and replica, which they hire out to telly companies for as props that they just have bought up from, you know, as collections. And so again, I've been around their warehouse picking out stuff. And trying to do you can tell that one's plastic, you can tell that one's rubber. Rattle the box, does it sound like bone or does it sound like plaster? Because we've got to start giving to a film crew to take them to Australia, and they frown upon kind of taking human remains through customs.
Good. Question there.
Is a show like Embarrassing Bodies a source of information or just entertainment purposes for you?
I avoid watching those programs because I think they are basically a freak show.
What's the program?
It's the sort of program where there was
They would have your friend with the gangrenous scrotum on it, you know, going, "Look what I've got," and doctors sort of going.
Or people with genetic disorders that make them look unusual.
Okay.
And I think that there's a very uncomfortable line in these things that, you know, they often cross the sideline. I feel is really, it makes it a freak show, and it's not always very nice for people participating.
In the middle of the back.
Two things, if I may. I have a doctorate in parasitology, so we cut up animals and look for stuff inside. Usually that's not a big deal, because the parasites are going to stay in the host where they can live. But there's one genus of groundworms, nematodes, which lives in the stomach of opossums. That in itself is a good trick. But when you cut it open, there's this mass of writhing, 4-inch long roundworms. Not nice. Not nice. 2, we were talking about smallpox. The genome for smallpox has been published. As you said, what could possibly go wrong?
You can buy all of the necessary components from pretty much unsecured catalogs, $35.95. But no one wants to use smallpox. Smallpox is too good at what it does.
Well, the older people in the population might survive a smallpox epidemic, because if you're in my generation or older, you'll have been immunised against it.
I got immunized. I went to the CDC. They put me in quarantine for a week. It was super fun.
Yeah. I think I've been immunised against smallpox 3 times in the course of my life. So hopefully that would be enough that I would survive, but it wouldn't be much fun if all the rest of the population died sort of under 50.
I think measles is more of a concern right now. We're circulating it in some very novel ways, and it really wants its clawhold back. And too many folks either are not vaccinated or have not had their titers checked anytime recently.
Or tuberculosis getting kind of antibiotic resistant. And one of the reasons we don't have leprosy in Europe is because tuberculosis outcompeted and drove it out. So, but they're very closely related, so, you could get lepromatous forms of tuberculosis, and that would be lovely.
That would be awesome! Do you know what the probability is? I'm going to find out what the probability is. I'm going to write a book.
Going back a bit more to the science fiction aspect, we're starting to do things genetically to lab out animals and getting very close to changing things inside human beings. And there's sort of 2 logical ways it can go, to cure diseases and conditions and so on, and also, if you like, to specifically make you something slightly different. What do you see the most likely things of going wrong in this? Because it's obviously going to happen sometime.
Well, if something goes wrong and it doesn't kill you outright, probably the most likely thing that anything going wrong causes is cancer. Because there's always a really fine line in our bodies between normal cellular reproduction and cancer. And basically all cancer is genetic in that it's due to loss of control of critical genes that, stop cells becoming rampant. So just about anything that you tinker with that goes wrong will give you cancer of some sort.
I think it's never wasted. It's kind of the John Christopher Death of Grass sort of thing. Someone invents something to get rid of that nasty stuff at the bottom of the garden. Oh dear, every cereal crop in the world is, kind of going. I think it's going to be the law of unintended consequences that someone won't check. And we rely on so much. I mean, even sort of a regular flu pandemic, it will cause chaos not because 100% of people will die, but because kind of 5% of the people have died, and another 10% are lying at home going, "Oh God, I'm too ill to go to work," and the infrastructure just collapses. It's London breaks when it snows. Can you imagine it snowing and there's a flu pandemic going on? It's so something small might cause huge consequences.
I guess one thing that kind of always surprises me is just how robust biology is, though, because we can fiddle with quite a bit before it breaks and just doesn't work. So probably I imagine the most likely outcome is if it goes wrong would be it doesn't fix your problem. And it gives you a couple more annoying problems, but you still kind of go through your life now with maybe some food intolerances and a bunch of weird little things that you might have to deal with.
I don't really do genetics much. I do genetics, but not in humans, because that is not an area I have specialized in. I think you could fix all those food intolerances with a nice tapeworm, though.
two people there, and those were the last two questions.
Right. A few weeks ago there was a story about an Italian doctor claiming that within 5 to 10 years it would be possible to transplant brains into other bodies. Don't know if it's true, but since you're doctors, I thought, do you think he's right? And if you were rich, would you have lined up some future hosts for your brains that you would want to move
I
into?
think it was heads, wasn't it, rather than just brains?
Possibly.
Yeah,
It was
wasn't
also
higher
easy
heads.
to do heads because you could sort of replumb it in much more easily than trying to plumb in a brain. The problem with that is that you'd be quadriplegic because you haven't quite got to the point yet of actually making sure you've got your connections between your brain and everywhere else sort of healed up enough. So I think I'd wait for my head transplant until they'd solved the quadriplegia problem.
I think he was interviewed on Radio 4 in the morning, and he got very hand-wavy when it came to exactly how you reconnect the spinal column. It was a kind of, you stick the two bits next to each other and bathe it in something, and it will work, he sort of will think.
What the immune system of the new body eat your brain?
Probably.
You can't be on immunosuppressants.
Yes, you have to live in a plastic bubble for the rest of your life. You'd better uploading your consciousness into silicon heaven with all the pocket calculators.
There was a...
Well, I was just thinking of the brain transplant. That reminds me of so I was actually at a conference once, and they were giving a talk, and he was studying, I think, whether or not the body or the brain caused male or female behaviors in quail. But after he said brain transplant, I don't think any of the audience heard anything else that he said. I don't remember the answer to this question, but apparently you can do this in a newly hatched quail.
I would not transplant my head unless it could be done safely and with no loss of mobility right now onto a body that was already related to me to minimize immune problems. Otherwise, I'm waiting for that forced cloning everyone tells me is totally possible. And I'm getting dropped into a 17-year-old version of myself once this body hits 112 and no longer wants to go up mountains. And that way I can find more things to poke with a stick.
I'm afraid we appear to have run out of time.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.